Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri YouTube video series, and today we have the second installment of excerpts from Vera Karalli's unpublished memoirs, and the date I'm guessing on it, but it's an educated guess. It really has to be 1916. We know Dmitri was not engaged with Karalli in 1915, unless it was in December. That's a possibility. But we also know that she had a part to play in the whole Rasputin affair. So it had to be, and also since Dmitri was banished from Russia at the end of that, that narrows it down. It had to be at some point in 1916 that all this was happening, or December 1915. So, in our recap, it so happened that Karalli was a friend. She was an actress, but she was a friend of Nina Nestorovskaya, who happened to be the mistress and later the wife of Prince Gavril Konstantinovich. It was a very stable relationship, and when he could, after the revolution, he married her. Gavril, that is. And Dmitri had apparently confided in Gavril and Nina that he would really like to have an informal wife, a wife/mistress. And so Nina had looked around and decided that Vera Karalli, well, in Vera's own words, that Vera had these desirable qualities that Dmitri in particular wanted. She wasn't mercenary, and she wasn't looking for status. She didn't care if she was with a Grand Duke or a carpenter. Well, you know, that all sounds very good. I find it a bit difficult to believe, since this is her saying it about herself. But, you know, yeah, the other thing was that supposedly she had various millionaire suitors, and she'd rejected them all and was living on her own funds. She probably did pretty well. You know, she was a very well-known, popular actress. And then the pursuit begins. Dmitri is very excited about this possibility, and in fact he goes off to Moscow right away, but she's not there. And so, you know, the cook, when she gets back, he's left a visiting card with his signature, and the cook just tells her, well, that some handsome officer, in her words, had come, and she says she's surprised. So that's the full recap. And now let us dive into the next section. Upon my return from Moscow, I found his visiting card. Sorry, I'm repeating this for the sake of the flow. Upon my return from Moscow, I found his visiting card hand-signed, and the cook told me that some handsome officer had been there. I was surprised, but didn't pay any attention to it, and left the next day for Yessentuki, Crimean place, I guess, to stay with Natasha. They had their own dacha there, and I wanted to spend the summer with them, as I had the year before, and then, before the start of the season, go to Nina's place in Pavlovsk for 2 weeks. It was always a lot of fun there. I had once undergone a course of treatment in Yessentuki, relaxing, taking baths, and drinking the water from my kidneys, which had acted up and made me ill. The management had given me 1,500 rubles and sent me to Yessentuki for treatment, and while I was there, I really did drink almost 20 glasses of water a day, number 4 and number 20. That was the first year of my professional career, and that was when I got to know Natasha. But I no sooner arrived in Yessentuki than Nina, at the insistence of D, began to bombard me with letters and telegrams urging me to come to her at once. And so I found myself in Pavlovsk. DP was due to arrive the next day. Taking stock of the ridiculous position I was in, i.e. with the inspection she puts inspection in quotes. I actually regretted coming and almost left that same evening, but of course they wouldn't hear of it. And so the big day arrived. There was great bustle in the house that morning. The order was given not to receive any outsiders. Nina's sister Lida and her husband, who was also a ballet dancer, lived with her every summer, and Dee knew them well. The cook was preparing something splendid, and overall the house seemed to be anticipating the arrival of the Inspector General, in quotes. I'm just going to put summer in bold here. Okay. And overall, the house seemed to be anticipating the arrival of the Inspector General, quotes, exclamation point. I rummaged through my entire wardrobe, what to wear. The two matchmakers were worried, which put me in a lively mood, and I told them I would slather myself with so much makeup that Dee would immediately flee the house. In general, we had a lot of fun. At 5 o'clock, a car pulled up, and Dee climbed out, swaying a bit as he walked, as always. I sat in my room and read, intent on leaving the next day, having remembered Leonid Vitalyevich. After a noisy greeting, everyone sat in the parlor and waited for my appearance. I didn't come. Nina hurried to me, but I said I would only come down for dinner. Then, after a few minutes had passed, there was a knock on my door, and all three of them appeared before me. Okay, I'm going to stop there on the cliffhanger. Rather annoying, I know. Sorry about that, but I couldn't resist. The thing I was making a note of is that we now have this narrowed down, because if Lida and her husband are there staying with Nina, that means it's summer. Apparently this was something they did in the summer. So this is the summer of 1916. All right, and let's take a look. So we have some lessons here on how a Grand Duke acquired a mistress. I'm sure you all remember the famous story of how Kshesinska was actually recruited for Nicholas II when he was a young man by his father, Alexander III. So, you know, these young ladies in the theater and dance world were considered safe to a certain extent. So neither Boris nor Gavril nor Andrei married their mistresses until after the revolution. And so, you know, it wasn't considered scandalous because they weren't going to marry them under normal circumstances, unlike somebody like Brasova, who Michael did indeed marry, or Princess Palais, Countess Hohenfelsen, who Paul married. You know, people from outside of that sort of safe, fun world of theater and ballet. Okay, so, you know, in Dmitri's case, it was through, let us say, personal recommendation, and there's the reference to the word matchmaker. So you had matchmaker, whether it was your own father or your cousin and his mistress, Gavril being the cousin. That was how apparently you went about it. And it would keep you out of the clutches of the women who were seriously looking for a husband. Okay, and when, after the revolution, Kshesinska tried, you know, to play this matchmaker role. On one occasion for Dmitri, he came to stay with Andrei and Kshesinska in the south of France to spend the night. And there was a young woman there, unmarried, and Kshesinska was practically undressing her and putting her in Dmitri's bed. But, you know, he said he was really tempted, but he didn't end up going through with it. And, you know, in this case, it wasn't a woman from the sort of demi-monde. At least he described her as being a young lady. You know, the word barishnya, meaning a young woman from a respectable noble family. But who knows? He might have been being sarcastic, God knows. Anyway, so yeah, matchmaking came into, maybe one of us should write a book on how to acquire a mistress if you're a Grand Duke. All right, so according to Karalli, Dmitri was very, very enthusiastic and aggressive. He couldn't, he did have things he had to do as far as he was active duty military, so apparently he couldn't just go take the train to the Crimea like he had to Moscow in pursuit of her. But so he asked, they hadn't been introduced, so it wouldn't have been right for him to write to her himself, so he had Nina do it. And she was there enjoying her time in drinking water number 4 and water number 20 for her health in this watering place. But the pressure was so great that she did indeed come back. Okay, so then what happens? Well, she says that she felt a little bit like a piece of meat, right? Who can blame her? She uses these two words, inspection and inspector general. So it's not kind of a two-way street. I mean, she has to like him, nobody is forcing her, but the sense is that the Grand Duke is going to inspect her body and personality. Okay. And the reference to, in the Inspector General, it's a reference to the famous play by Gogol, but content-wise, it doesn't really have anything to do with the play. It's just, a title that every Russian would know, the Inspector General. So she refers to Dmitri as the Inspector General. One of the odder things that I've come across that, even more so than Lillian of the Valley, of the things that people call him. Okay, now this intrigues me very much. She says he got out of his car, swaying a bit as he walked. As always, she must have been watching from the window. Why did he sway when he walked? I don't think, I think there's some credibility to it, because it was also something that was noted in the 1990s by Frédéric Mitterrand in France, the notorious minister of culture there for a while when his uncle François Mitterrand was in power. And Frederick, got up to some unfortunate things in Thailand, which he admitted to later in his memoirs, if you can imagine. But anyway, I happened to meet him. He invited me to come and talk to him about Dmitri, and I was in London, so he paid for me to come across the English Channel and meet him at a famous restaurant, the Cow on the Roof, it's called. I'm not going to try and pronounce it in my lousy French. And what he wanted from me was, it turned out, I'm sure I've told this story before, was he wanted me to give him a list of all of Dmitri's lovers, taken from, the information that I had, which by then was the diaries. And I had just newly acquired my copies of the diaries with the blessing of Paul Ilyinsky, and I hadn't got really a chance to know Paul beyond our first meeting, and so I was hesitant to do this. And I told him, it would have been fine. Paul wouldn't have cared one little bit. But I said no, and he got so angry that he got up and left the restaurant. Luckily, he paid the bill on his way out. This was we'd already had our lunch, but it was just abrupt. I'm not, what does Dmitri say in relation to Andre in 1921? I'm not offering you bread and salt. I'm not, whatever. He didn't say that. He just left. And paid the bill. But during the course of our conversation, he had told me that he'd noticed in film footage of Dmitri, he was working on doing a documentary on the Romanovs for French TV, and he said he noticed that Dmitri had this way of walking that was very sensual. He didn't call it swaying. He just said, it's like a leopard. It's like some big cat that is, it's very sexy. Okay. Karalli says it was swaying, but apparently however you interpreted it, whether as, something that indicated maybe too much horseback riding or or leg injuries that he'd had from horseback riding, but he was a very good dancer. So, you know, maybe it was a dancer's sort of way to moving. I'm very intrigued by it. I've seen film footage of him playing tennis, and I've seen film footage of him in procession behind Nicholas II in imperial family processions, but I didn't notice he was swaying. So, anyway, yeah. By the way, who was Leonid Vitalyevich? This was an opera singer, very handsome, or was considered so. He's back in the Crimea, the people that she was staying with there, and so she decides, yeah, I'm just going to go back. I don't want this. I don't want to be inspected. I'm putting words in her mouth, but that's reading between the lines what she's saying, whether sincerely or not, or to make herself sound good in her memoirs. So she sees him come up to the house, watches him swaying, and then everybody expects her to come down. The Grand Duke is here. No, she says, I'm not coming down until dinner. The knock on the door. I don't know why I re-narrated that whole thing. I guess I just find it so interesting. Anyway, next time we'll have the actual encounter itself. My neighbor is mowing his lawn now, so a good time to end, and I hope to see you then. Bye.